Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant right here on the YouTube channel. I am Graham Justin Matthews here today to present to you my review of WWE Judgment Day 2003 as seen on the WWE Network. So, of course, the entire month of May here in WrestleRant is dedicated to the old Judgment Day pay-per-views. If you haven't already caught it, go back and check out my reviews of Judgment Day 1998, 2000, and 2001. There is no 1999 installment, and there's also the review of 2002's installment is already up here on the channel from about a year ago, so go back in the archives to check out my thoughts on that show. Judgment Day 2003 kicking off with a six-man tag team matchup. The full-blooded Italians, Chuck Palumbo and John Stamboli, teaming with John Cena, of all people, to take on the trio of Chris Benoit, Rhino, and Spanky. So it was a fun match while it lasted. It really didn't get that much time. And by the way, this was at a time when the pay-per-views were still being divided between Raw and SmackDown. They were still being shared by Raw and SmackDown, excuse me. This was before they became, Raw exclusive and SmackDown exclusive, only before, other than the big four pay-per-views, the big four shows. This show in particular was still Raw and SmackDown shared. So you got some Raw show, you got some Raw storylines, and some SmackDown storylines. This, of course, was a SmackDown matchup. So it was, like I said, it was a fun match. Nothing wrong with it. People got in some offense towards the end, and in the end, the heels, John Cena and the FBI, ended up going over, the full-blooded Italians. So it was more interesting than anything else for a few reasons, for many reasons here. First off, at the Backlash pay-per-view a month prior, John Cena was in one of the main events against Brock Lesnar for the WWE title, and of course this was, well a decade before they would clash over the WWE title in 2015. But, they had a decent match. They had a really good match on that show. And then a month later, John Cena is involved in this random-ass six-man tag team match on the show in the opening match. So that was weird to see. But he played his role well. He cut a promo before the match. Didn't really get much heat. I mean, the crowd is more with him than they were against him, which is weird considering he was a heel and he was more liked, which is probably why he's not very well liked now. By a majority of the people. I'm not talking about kids and women and whatever else. That's another rant for another day. But, his promo was well received on this show. It was a fine promo. The match itself, like I said, was a fun way of kicking off the show. Enjoy Rhino and Benoit just kicking people's asses. Spanky was an interesting aspect of this matchup. That was another reason. Spanky, of course, later known as Brian Kendrick. And they did call him Brian Kendrick here. But he was listed as Spanky. He was announced as Spanky, but even though on the name card when he came out, on the title screen, it said, and in quotation marks, Brian Kendrick, and then Spanky. So that was interesting. But yeah, a fun matchup. Cena on the heels, Cena and the FBI pick up the victory, so kind of a decent way of kicking off the show. Another tag team match up next. La Resistance taking on Test and Scott Steiner from the Raw brand. So a fine matchup, but it was more of an angle than it was a match. La Resistance had just debuted, and you could tell. I mean, they showed some footage of their debut, kind of insulting Scott Steiner. But when they came out, though, I don't think they were waving a flag like they would later on in their run. They were just kind of randomly just putting on some attire and stuff like that. They just basically just look like rookies. But they were good in the ring here. I always enjoyed La Resistance. A very underrated tag team. When you think of the greatest tag teams in the last 10 years, I'm not saying they're even in the top 5. But they were a pretty good tag team for both of their runs, I want to say. They did split up at one point, and then they were... Rene Dupree was on the SmackDown brand, and then maybe Grenier teamed up with maybe Rob Conway, I want to say, or maybe somebody else. But, La Resistance was a pretty good tag team, held the World Tag Team titles for a while, and this win would catapult them to the tag team titles later down the line. But a decent match here, like I said, more about the teasing tension between Test and Scott Steiner. This was around the time that Test was, of course, a kayfabe relationship with Stacy Keibler, who accompanied them to the ring for this matchup. And Scott Steiner was caring for her. Test didn't like that. He was the jealous boyfriend. We've seen this story a million times. And then Scott Steiner accidentally ate a boot from Test during this matchup, causing him to get pinned. And then after the matchup, Stacy Keibler was tending to Scott Steiner in the ring. Test would try to take her out. Not take her out, like knock her out, but take her out of the ring with him, and she was having none of it, stayed behind with Scott, and that kind of teased more tension, like I said, between Test and Scott Steiner. So the match was fine, but it was a decent tag team match, but the focus was more on the tension teased between Test and Steiner than it was about La Resistance winning, even though it was a nice win for them regardless. Up next, the best bout on this entire show, in my opinion, or at least one of the greatest matches on the show, a tag team title ladder match for the WWE Tag Team Championships. Team Angle, Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin respectively, teaming up, or collectively known as, the world's greatest tag team, just without Kurt Angle. Or Kurt Angle not involved in this matchup, of course. They would later become known as the world's greatest tag team without Kurt Angle. Their opponents on this show, Eddie Guerrero and Tajiri. Chavo Guerrero was out with an injury, so he teamed up with Tajiri instead. As you would expect, look at the 4 people involved. You have fucking Shelton Benjamin, one of the masters of the Money in the Bank ladder match, as we would come to know. This was only 03. Charlie Haas, Eddie Guerrero, and Tajiri. You put those 4 guys into a match together, you have a great fucking ladder match, and that's exactly what this was. So a really, really fun matchup. Could have benefited from some more time, like a few more minutes, but other than that, no complaints. Some really cool tag team maneuvers. Charlie Haas and Benjamin had such great chemistry together. It was always a mystery to me why they ever split them up to begin with. They were a really, really good tag team. I know they had plans for Shelton on Raw, which ended up going nowhere. I know he got a few big wins here and there. But other than that, though, he never really reached the mountaintop in WWE. He was always like a mid-card guy at best. But, as a tag team, though, him and Charlie Haas were phenomenal. This matchup was no exception. And they worked well quick on their feet, did Eddie and Tajiri. Like I said, Chavo was supposed to be in this matchup at the last minute. He got replaced by Tajiri due to an injury. So even Tajiri and Eddie Guerrero, 2 former ECW originals, working very well together here, ascending the ladder and winning the WWE Tag Team title. So kind of a shocker there for that duo, for that combination to win the Tag Team Championship. So a great matchup, very, very enjoyable as one would expect. Up next, an over-the-top rope battle royale to determine a new Intercontinental Champion. Now, it was the year prior, and I think about October of 2002, that the title was deemed inactive. I think it was after Triple H and Kane had merged those championships. Kane was the IC champion, and Triple H merged his World Heavyweight Championship with the Intercontinental title after beating Kane for it in late 2002. So after all was said and done, they brought the title back at the hands of co-Raw GM Eric Bischoff, or I think it was Stone Cold Steve Austin, who, speaking of whom, was great throughout the show. The chemistry that he and Eric had together as co-GMs, for as long as it lasted, I know it did not last very long, but for the time they were together, it was very entertaining, a lot of fun to watch. And they were in various segments throughout the show, and at one point kind of building to Eric Bischoff eating too much, drinking too much beer, and ultimately puking in one of the waitresses and the crowd at ringside. Not at ringside, but through one of the windows, and one of the suite windows or something like that. So those were pretty entertaining. But yeah, it was Stone Cold Steve Austin who brought back the Intercontinental Championship out of retirement in a battle royale, which is not very common. When a title is vacated, it is rarely ever brought back. So, the Intercontinental Championship is one of the most prestigious prizes in the industry. So it was always weird to me why they ever vacated it or, deemed it inactive for as long as they did. It wasn't for a few weeks or not even a few months. It was about, 7 months before this show. Still, though, they try to make it as much as possible, with the pre-match video package kind of highlighting the greatest Intercontinental Champions of all time, from Pat Patterson to Macho Man and Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and the list goes on and on and on. Who, speaking of whom, Pat Patterson was at ringside for this matchup. I think he was going to present the newly won Intercontinental title to the new champion. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, I thought this matchup, it was your typical battle royal. Where the eliminations were pretty random, and one of the things about this matchup that made it special was that every competitor, with the exception of Booker T, was a former Intercontinental Champion. So that was pretty cool. It was kind of a nice little twist, and Booker T, you would think, would have won it, considering how he was the only one who had never won the Intercontinental Championship before. And he did come close. He tossed Christian out to ringside at one point, but the referee wasn't looking. He was down and out at ringside. So Christian came back in, and when the referee was up and he was, paying attention, Christian threw him over the top rope and won the matchup, winning his second Intercontinental Championship. And this was kind of the rebirth of the Christian character, and this was 2003. He was doing some cool stuff in 2002, but it really wasn't until this point in time that his career as a singles competitor really kind of kicked off. Because after Edge, after he broke up with Edge was kind of flourishing over on the SmackDown brand. Christian didn't really do much other than serving as an undercard character for most of 2002, but he would really come into his own as a singles competitor, as Intercontinental Champion, starting with this show, with his championship win here, by lastly eliminating Booker T. And it's also kind of notable, too, that we also had Val Venus, the return of the Val Venus character. Sean Morley was serving as the... not the chief. Wasn't he a chief or something like that? or a sheriff or something like that of Monday Night Raw, an authority figure. He got fired from that position. Austin brought him back as a wrestler in the Val Venus role, so he was one of the first ones eliminated. But yeah, that character was also brought back in this matchup, as he also was a former Intercontinental Champion. Other combatants included Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, Rob Van Dam, Kane, Goldust, and Test. Up next, a Bikini challenge between Tori Wilson and Sable. Now, if you've been watching my reviews, listening to my reviews for, the past year or so, my thoughts on, bikini challenges and stuff like that are pretty well documented around this period in time, from the Attitude Era to the Ruthless Aggression Era and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to repeat myself here. But this was entertaining. As a guy, I'm not going to complain. It was a lot of fun to watch, especially given that both Sable and Tori Wilson are sights for sore eyes. A big fan of Tori Wilson, and Sable's pretty hot herself, of course. I mean, that goes without saying. So it was really fun to watch. It was, your typical bikini challenge. What else is there more to say than that? It was a bikini challenge involving Tori Wilson and Sable. Fucking go see it. I mean, what else can I say? I think, obviously Tori Wilson won. She was a little behind. Sable got more of the cheers, which was weird. Even though she was the heel, I mean, she is the hotter of the two anyway. To each their own, but she got the bigger cheers of the two. Then Tori Wilson stripped even more, which earned her the victory. And it was funny. I think one of the highlights of this entire thing, other than the bikini challenge itself, was watching Jerry Lawler just mark out on commentary without any sound or anything. It was just funny to see his reactions to Tori and Sable stripping. Basically, it was pretty funny. So that was that. Up next, we had Mr. America versus Rowdy Roddy Piper in almost a WrestleMania 1 flashback. Thankfully, the match was only about 5 minutes long, and much like the tag team match from earlier between La Resistance and Test and Scott Steiner, this was more of an angle than it was a match. And of course, Mr. America, a.k.a. Hulk Hogan, you don't need me to tell you that. This is around the time that Mr. McMahon fired Hulk Hogan from WWE. He came back under the Mr. America moniker, and, he couldn't prove that he was Hulk Hogan. We had a pretty fun backstage segment earlier on in the evening that I forgot to mention. It was between Hogan, or Captain America, whatever, and then Gregory Helms, a.k.a. the Hurricane. And, as Gregory Helms, he was a reporter. And he was asking Hogan, like, are you really Hogan, Captain America? Are you really Captain America? What do you have to say about these rumors? And then Hogan said, well, I heard a rumor that you were actually the Hurricane. So it was pretty funny. So that there was a fun backstage segment from earlier on in the show. But yeah, the match itself, I mean, a match featuring Hogan and Piper in 2003 was basically everything you would expect. And like I said, with Sean O'Haire at ringside, and then later Zach Gowen, who got attacked by Rowdy Roddy Piper only days before this on SmackDown. He had his leg torn off, and the amputee guy, Zach Gowen, an amazing in-ring athlete. With the prosthetic leg, that was like what people will remember him for, as the guy who had an amputee leg or whatever. But the guy was an incredible in-ring athlete, and this was kind of the introduction of him to the WWE storylines, preventing Mr. McMahon from getting involved in the matchup and granting Mr. America the victory. And Sean O'Haire was wasted in all of this. I think I talked about it in my Backlash 03 review. And maybe they thought by pairing him with Piper, one of the biggest heels in WWE history, they thought he would be better off and he would get a nice rub from that. But did he really benefit from working with Hogan? I think he might have even beat Hogan at one point. But, other than that, his career really went nowhere in WWE. I think he later got injured, and even before that, I don't think they were doing anything with him. But I will always love his vignettes. I'm not telling anything you didn't already know. Like stuff like that I thought was great. Those vignettes, check them out on YouTube. Awesome stuff. The match itself, everything you would expect it would be. But the incorporation of all the interference actually helped the matchup. It kind of distracted from the in-ring action, which is usually a bad thing. But in this case, I think it worked because Hogan and Piper could only work so good of a matchup, So it was fine for what it was. Mr. America goes over, thus furthering the storyline with Zach Gowen being incorporated, Sean O'Haire, Mr. McMahon, and so on and so forth. Up next, for the World Heavyweight Championship, Triple H defending against Kevin Nash. And again, more of an angle than it was in match. So there's a common theme throughout the night, with Triple H and Kevin Nash basically taking turns just beating the shit out of Earl Hebner, the referee. One would push Earl, then the other would push Earl, and then both of them would push Earl. Then in the end, Triple H, I think, would hit a steel chair, or he would miss and I think hit Earl by accident or something like that. He got himself disqualified, obviously, giving Kevin Nash the victory, though because it was via disqualification, Triple H would not forfeit the World Heavyweight Championship. So I can't really rate the matchup. I can't call it good. I can't call it bad, because there really was no matchup. It was mostly brawling for the 7 minutes they were out there. I mean, a 7-minute world title match, come on. It was mostly a brawl, and then the stuff with Earl Hebner kind of made it clear that this was not intended to be a matchup. I mean, of course, it was fitting of the feud. These guys really wanted to get their hands on each other and just kind of tear each other apart. And it was serving as a placeholder until the Hell in a Cell match, which was really good. I watched it on my Hell in a Cell DVD, the compilation of all the Hell in a Cell matches from 97 to 2007. And I think at the Bad Blood pay-per-view in early June of 2003. But yeah, this would basically be building towards that. So this was a throwaway matchup. Kevin Nash winning the match via DQ. Triple H retaining the World Heavyweight Championship. Can't call it bad. I can't really call it good because it really wasn't much of a match to begin with. But it was effective booking, and then it really kind of just... they made this matchup feel pretty meaningless, but it did help build towards the Hell in a Cell match to determine a decisive winner with Shawn Michaels, I believe it was. I think it was Mick Foley as the special guest referee the following month at Bad Blood. Up next, a Fatal 4-Way match for the WWE Women's Championship. Jacqueline defending against Trish Stratus, Jazz, and Victoria. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the backstory of this bout was Trish Stratus winning the women's title in a triple threat match at WrestleMania between Victoria, who was the then champion, and Jazz. The following month at Backlash, Jazz beat Trish for the belt, leading to this Fatal 4-Way match on this show. Jacqueline walking in as the champion, Jazz, walking in as the champion and walking out as the women's champion. The match itself, it was good. You had a lot of good talent in there. All four of these women were really good women's wrestlers, and they really left a mark on the business in their own way. But it felt more like filler. There really wasn't any reason for me to care. I respect the in-ring abilities of all four women, like I said, but from a storyline standpoint, there really was no reason for me to care. There was no pre-match promo. I don't think we heard from any of the women. So maybe Jazz, but other than that, if that at all, I might be thinking of Backlash. But other than that, there really wasn't any reason to kind of get excited about this match. The crowd kind of came alive for some of the spots, but they were really just kind of waiting for the main event. There were 9 matches on this card, so kind of a long night. And some of these matches, granted, could have been scrapped, so to make room to kind of make more time for the world title matches and the bigger matches, but it was what it was. When you put a women's title match right before the main event, it's going to die a death. So they were kind of put in a tough spot. The crowd really wasn't into anything they were doing, but it was still, from a in-ring standpoint, it was a well-wrestled matchup, and Jazz walked out, still the women's champion, coming up against all odds. There were some pretty, gruesome spots, not gruesome, but pretty brutal spots in the matchup, too. I think Trish at one point got fucking launched to the outside, and her face first. I think she might have been bleeding at the end of the matchup, but it was pretty brutal. But nevertheless, Jazz walking out, still the women's champion. Up next, we get to the main event, Brock Lesnar versus The Big Show for the WWE Championship in a stretcher match. The commentator said it was the first stretcher match in about 17 years since Andre the Giant versus Killer Khan. But I looked it up, and I did do an article for What Culture about a year ago, ranking every stretcher match in WWE history. And even when I Googled it, I thought, 17 years didn't sound correct. Because, this is nitpicking here, obviously. 17 years from 2003 would have been, 1986? But I think the stretcher match either happened, I think it happened in the early 80s, not the late 80s. I think it might have been 81 or 83 even. It definitely wasn't 1986, so I think that might have been a mistake on their part. But still, I thought this was a really, really good match. And, always really, not bother me, but, people were saying when Brock came back that they were hoping to see him do battle with Brock Lesnar or with Big Show and have, the same kind of matches they had back in 03-04. I didn't really care for their Survivor Series match. It really wasn't even much of a match. I talked about that in my 02 review of Survivor Series. It was like a 4 or 5 minute match. It was more of an angle than anything, with Lesnar going babyface and Big Show winning the belt and Heyman screwing over Lesnar. This was more of a match between the two, and I think it worked to their benefit. They had some really good matches that year, but I feel like the stipulation of a stretcher match, which can either make or break a match. This is around the time that it was first reintroduced to the WWE Universe. We don't really get, we hadn't had a stretcher match in close to 2 decades at this point. So it kind of worked to their advantage. They were able to incorporate a lot of cool spots. Brock Lesnar was all over the place towards the end of the matchup. Very hard-hitting bout as well. Towards the end of the matchup, Brock Lesnar, I think he left to the back. What's the word I'm looking for? He just walked to the backstage, or he retreated to the back, I guess I should say. That was the word I was looking for. So he retreated to the back, and out comes Rey Mysterio, who was injured at the hands of the Big Show, like I said in my 2003 review of Backlash, just 1 month prior. So Rey Mysterio comes out, tries to take it to the Big Show. Of course, not very successful. He tries his best, but before Big Show could lay out Rey Mysterio, out comes Brock Lesnar on a fucking, what do you even call it? I forgot what it's called. I know... fuck. I'm going to look up it right now. It doesn't say here. Shit. Oh, man. It was one of those trucks. I forgot what it's called. One of the lifters. Fuck. The word is escaping me. But the same kind of truck that that Daniel Bryan brought up to ringside that he carried Kane out on. A forklift. Fuck. That's the word I'm looking for. I always have these words, but they're on the tip of my tongue. I just don't know what they're called. But yeah. Brock Lesnar bringing out a forklift to ringside, the only possible way he's going to beat the Big Show. So he parks it right next to ringside. He jumps off the top of the forklift, right on top of Big Show, laying him out with a crossbody. And then he would take up Big Show in the middle of the ring, put him on top of the forklift, drive the forklift over the finish line, and technically that was his version of a stretcher. So he won the matchup, Brock Lesnar retaining the WWE title. So I thought that was a very innovative finish. We got something similar, like I said before, between Bryan and Kane at Extreme Rules 2014. That was well over a decade later. But still, though, I thought this was really cool. I thought it was a really, really good matchup, and this is coming from someone that is not a huge Big Show fan. Anyone who knows me well enough knows that for a fact, but I thought this was a really good matchup, and the stuff with Rey Mysterio, too, I thought also furthered their feud well. A grand return for Rey Mysterio that we kind of heard from him before the bout on an episode of SmackDown, him saying that he was kind of clear to compete in a couple of weeks. He might be back pretty soon, and he ended up coming back on this show. So that was cool. That was a cool moment. Furthered the feud between those two, kept the belt on Brock Lesnar, and served as a placeholder before Kurt Angle came back and contended for the belt in that triple threat match at Vengeance. So really, really good main event on the whole. I thought this was a good show. Not a great show, but I thought it was good for the most part. Like I said, a lot of this stuff was placeholder and kind of, tune into the next pay-per-view to find out more. Like with Bad Blood between Nash and Triple H, that was the real blow-off. This was kind of a filler matchup. And Judgment Day kind of has that effect. I know in recent year, in its final years from like 2007 to 2009 anyway, a lot of the matches were kind of filler before. They weren't really like the blow-off. That's kind of what Judgment Day was, but there were still a lot of good events, and after the awesome 2001 show, it was going to be hard to top that one, but I thought this was a pretty good show. Better than the O2 installment. I thought this one was a significant improvement over that one. Like I said, if you want to check out my review of O2 Judgment Day here on the channel from last year, right here in the WrestleRant video series. But on the whole, though, good show. Really enjoyed the main event. Nash and Triple H was throwaway, but for a reason, so I was fine with that. The America and Piper stuff, the Hogan and Piper stuff, fine for what it was. It was enjoyable. They told the story. That was really all that mattered. New Intercontinental Champion crown, new WWE Tag Team Champions crown. Great match. Go out of your way to check out that match. Either that or the main event are well worth going out of your way to see. And go out of your way to see John Cena and Brian Kendrick involved in the same match before they became who they were many years later. So, good show. Enjoyed it. Go back and watch it on the WWE Network for only... It's free for the month of May, so you don't have to pay $9.99. I'm paying $9.99, but that's only because I've been a day one subscriber. And that's another rant for another day. But in the meantime, and in between time, folks, make sure to find me on Twitter at WrestleRant. Make sure to find me on Facebook at Graham GSM Matthews at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. You can find me on YouTube right here just by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. All support is greatly appreciated. I'll be back on... today is Saturday. I'll be back tomorrow with my review of Judgment Day 2004. Thanks for listening, folks, and I'll catch you then.